Hi, welcome to the Gemara on Tet Amud Bet. We're starting from the second Mishnah on the Amud. This is another one of the Ein Bein Mishnayot, and again, there are some categories here that you might not be familiar with, so I've brought some Rashis down at the bottom of this page to help you figure out what these are. Ein Bein Bama Gedola LeBama Ketana Ela Psachim. There is no difference between a large altar and a small altar except for the Korban Pesach. So what does this mean? A bama gdola is a communal altar, a communal mizbeach, and a bama ketana is one's own personal mizbeach that you might sort of set up in your own backyard. And as Rashi tells you, there was a time when private mizbechot, private altars were permitted. You didn't have to go to the Beit HaMikdash to offer your sacrifices. You could have either a bama gdola, a big communal mizbeach, or your own private bama in your own household, and you were allowed to offer certain sacrifices that way. So Rashi tells you here, ein hefresh b'sha'at heter habamot ben bama gdola. So at a time, sha'at heter habamot, at a time when these private altars were permitted, there was no difference between a bama gdola and that's a mizbeach shel Moshe's mizbeach, when it was still in Nov or Givon. These are places described in Sefer Shoftim. So no difference between that big bama and a bama ketana. Rashi tells you mizbeach shel yachid, right? Your own individual mizbeach. A person could make one for himself. So there's no difference between these two types of non-Beit HaMikdash altars, except for Pesachim. The Pesach offering could only be offered on a bama gedola, not on your own private individual altar of a bama ketana. Zeh haklal. This is the rule. Kol shehu nider v'nidev karev b'bama. Anyone who makes a promise, makes a vow or offers to bring a korban. We've talked before about nidarim and nedavot. Anyone who voluntarily brings a korban, decides, I'm going to bring a korban, that may be offered on a bama. Rashi tells you specifically we're talking about here bama ketana. So when you decide, I'm going to bring, right, either you say Harei Alai Korban or Harei Zo Ola, right? But you decide voluntarily that you're going to bring a Korban. So you're allowed to do that on a Bama Ketana. V'kol she'ino lo nider v'lo nidev, eino karev b'bama. And if you didn't volunteer in some way to bring the Korban, meaning it's an obligatory Korban, not one that you volunteered to bring, then you cannot offer it on a Bama Ketana. Your first question to answer for homework is, if you were the Gemara, what questions would you ask about this Mishnah? And take a minute and answer that question now before you see the Gemara. Going on in the Gemara. Psachim v'tulo. Psachim and no more? Question mark, exclamation point. Two means more. So is that the Gemara is questioning this idea that really the only difference between bama gdola and bama ketana is that you can offer psachim on the bama gdola and not on the bama ketana. Is that really the only difference? Ema ke'ein psachim. I will say things that are like psachim. So the Gemara kind of amends the Mishnah, changes at least the interpretation of the Mishnah. So this doesn't really mean just psachim. It means all things that are like psachim, meaning obligatory korbanot, offerings that you have to bring that you didn't just volunteer to bring. Mani, a question that we're familiar with. The Gemara asks, whose opinion is reflected in this Mishnah? Rabbi Shimon he. It is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Titania, as we learned in a Braita. I'll put this as proof. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon said, Af tzibor lo hikrivu el psachim v'chovot shekavu alahem zman. Sorry. Aval chovot she'en kavu alahem zman hacha v'hacha lo karev. So Rabbi Shimon said, even the tzibor, even the congregation, groups of people, didn't offer anything except psachim and obligations that were that had a fixed time, things that you had to do at a fixed time. Aval chavot she'en kavu lahem zman, but things that obligations that didn't have a fixed time, hacha v'hacha lo karev. Both here and here, they weren't offered, meaning both in the bama ketana and the Bama Gdolah, they weren't offered. So the idea here is obligatory sacrifices with set times. Those can be brought on a Bama Gdolah, right? Meaning even a Bama Gdolah, even something that the Tzibor went to, which is a Bama Gdolah, the only kind of offering that you could bring was something that had a set time. So psachim, timidim, things that had to be offered every day and had a fixed time, things that had to be offered at a particular time. But other kinds of sacrifices that didn't have a fixed time, like let's say a chatat, where you did something wrong and then you had to bring a korban, that could not be offered. That could neither be offered in a Bama Gdolah nor in a Bama Ktana. So in conclusion, the Gemara just supports the Mishnah. Things that are like psachim, that have a fixed time or a fixed obligation, those could be brought in a Bama Gdolah. Others were not. And your final question is just to make yourself a little structure chart of this very little piece of Gemara, just to make sure that you understand it. Do it so that you'll be able to look at it and understand it.